This DIY bass shaker setup has 6 shakers, layers of feedback with localized feel, all for about the same price as one butt kicker. In this video, I'm going to explain how my DIY shaker setup works and why I chose to build it this way. Keep in mind this is just my personal project and where it's currently at, but so far I'm really happy with it, so I wanted to share what I've done for other people to learn from to build their own setup. So if you're still with me, let's jump into it.
iRacing doesn't have an intro, 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 doesn't have an intro. iRacing doesn't have an intro, so I made this shitty one using EI. I might make a real one in the future, but right now it's out of the budget. So stay tuned if you want to watch a guy who only kind of knows what he's doing. Try to explain it to someone else while also trying to figure out how to make a YouTube channel. We're talking about things like sim racing and 3D printing and making stuff and fixing stuff you did wrong the first time you did it. This is gonna be totally worth your time. Totally worth your time. This is gonna be totally worth your time.
Aside from the obvious benefits of having haptics, which I'll go into a little more detail later, there's a few good reasons why you should do a DIY setup. First, it's definitely going to cost you less than buying something off the shelf. Realistically, there's not a lot of options, but they're all pretty expensive for what they give you.
What the f?
Second, it's not really that complicated to do. If you don't know what you're doing, it probably feels kind of intimidating to think about putting it together, but the reality is it's actually super simple. If I could do it, you could do it.
I'm not a smart man.
Third, you can customize it to suit your rig and fit your needs exactly to give you what you want, and it allows you to easily experiment later down the line to upgrade and adjust it as you go. With something like a butt kicker, you're just stuck with what you got. I started with 4 shakers on my rig and just recently added 2 extras, so I have 6 now.
That's impressive.
And lastly, because learning stuff's cool, and being able to make your own things is a lot more rewarding and fun than just buying stuff. So now let's actually just talk about what a bass shaker is. I'm not an engineer, so I'm not going to get super deep into technical stuff here, but if you're like me when I started sim racing and you've never actually seen a bass shaker before, this is probably going to be helpful for you to understand how to put a setup together. A bass shaker is essentially a speaker, just different. Instead of projecting sound with a big cone like a normal speaker does, a bass shaker is just a big magnet that just shakes a lot. In the real world, most people use bass shakers to create the same rumble that you would get from a big subwoofer, maybe in like a home theater setup, without moving as much air, aka making as much sound. That's it. In a typical setup, you drive the shaker the same way you drive a normal speaker, so with an amp and the audio signals, usually just the low-end sound going to the shaker. But the problem in sim racing is that a lot of the sound is just noise, and while it feels really cool to feel the rumble of the engine and stuff like that, a lot of that is going to interfere with good information that you can get from the sim. In a real car, your body can feel the grip of the tires change through the vibrations in the steering wheel. You can feel the inertia of the car as you go through a corner. In my opinion, it's more important to try to get performance than just fun immersion out of anything I'm doing to the sim rig. So this is really my perspective when it comes to shakers and haptics on the sim. For about $10, there's a much better way to get your signal to your shakers. Here? I'll put it here. SimHub. SimHub's an app that costs like $10. You can use telemetry data from the sim of your choice to drive the shakers with more specificity than just using the audio signal. SimHub allows you to customize the data that gets sent to your shakers so you can dial it in for your perfect setup. If you're a new sim racer and you don't use SimHub yet, you need to get it. There's way more to it than just controlling shakers, and I'm not going to try to explain it all here, so we'll circle back to the SimHub thing later when I explain it in more detail. Let's move on to the actual physical part of the build. So in order to make a complete bass shaker setup, you need a few specific components. The main thing is a power supply to give the shakers electricity. Then an external sound card to send the signal to the shakers, amplifiers to convert the signal from whatever the computer sends to what the shakers need, and of course the shakers themselves. Depending on what shakers you want, all the other stuff will change either in capacity or quantity, so you're going to have to figure it out yourself if you want to do something completely different. But again, not that hard. So my personal setup is as follows. For my power supply, I have a Meanwell 12-volt, 350-watt power supply that I got from an old 3D printer. Having more power wouldn't be a bad thing, but in my opinion, this is just enough to get the job done for what I have. I have a second one sitting around if I need to expand, so we'll see if I use that in the future. For my external sound card, I chose this Startech 7.1 sound card for a couple of reasons. One, it was pretty much the cheapest one. Two, it was a really good price. And three, it was inexpensive. Honestly, though, I have no issues to report back about mine. Shout out to Startech for making super reliable and affordable electronic stuff. My amplifiers are DIY Amp Boards from Amazon. I found these just searching for the power output I wanted, and they've been great. A lot of people use knob sound amps because they include the external sound card interface as well, but I've heard a lot of people complaining about reliability with those and underpowering their shakers.
It looks questionable to me.
I don't have that problem with my setup, so I recommend it, even though it's maybe a little more expensive. I actually 3D printed a little housing to add a fan and organize the amps a bit, but in honesty, you really don't need the fan, and you could just double stick tape them all together. That's what I did for a few months, and it worked just fine. So, for the next part, shakers, the fun part, the actual interesting part with an explanation. My personal setup is using two types of shakers, the BST-2 4-ohm shaker and the TT-25 8-ohm shaker, both from Dayton. The BST-2 is a lower end frequency than the TT-25 shakers, and I placed them on the side of my seat brackets using 3M VHB tape. Having these on the left and right sides of the rig allows me to have more localized feel for effects like curbs and bumps and general road impact, stuff that you'd feel through your butt in a real car. Two of these at full blast is enough to be felt upstairs in my house, so for people concerned about having too much immersion, these are pushing the threshold for what I'd consider reasonable in like an apartment. But since I wanted more, I added two of the TT-25 8-ohm shakers on my pedals, and then another set inside the cushions on my Sparco GP seat. The TT-25 shakers are a slightly higher frequency than the BST-2s, which means they essentially have a higher pitched output. They vibrate kind of more buzzy than rumbly. I like these shakers for the pedals and closer to the body because they remind me of the vibrations you feel through the chassis in a real car in relation to the tires, like understeer and oversteer. In my limited experience on track, it feels like the right frequency when you're sliding. We're going to cut to pictures of me drifting really shitty right now. So, with my low-end frequency chassis effects, I rarely have the gain set to more than 50 or 60%. More than that, and the vibration and resonance feels uncomfortable and unrealistic to any car I've ever driven. On my pedals and seat, I have the gain higher, but usually on about 80% max. Again, any more than that, and the vibration coming through starts to get excessive. If you decide to build your own setup, understand that the power supply and the amplifier choices are all informed by the size of your shakers. Underpowering your shaker can lead to overheating and damaging the shaker itself. Avoid this by running your shaker gain low enough that you don't experience any clipping. And make sure your amps have enough headroom to handle what you're throwing at it. Now, let's talk about how I have SimHub programmed. Okay, so we're in the sim rig now, and we're going to walk through how the shaker setup works. Turn it on. So, once you have your whole shaker setup built out, the first thing you're going to need to do, you want to set up your audio card. You want to go through configure and configure it as a 7.1 surround. Maybe it's 5.1 surround, but I cannot remember, to be honest. I'll link somebody's tutorial in the description because I don't know anymore exactly what I did, and I'm not about to fuck mine up to find out. Okay, so once you've got your sound card installed, you want to open up SimHub. That's not how you do it. That's SimHub. So, you're going to want to go through and do a lot of other setup stuff when you get SimHub. Again, I'm not going to show you here. You can just look up somebody else's video. It'll be fine. With the bass shaker stuff, once you have your sound card installed, it's going to show up here in your output selection list. So here you can see in the sound output tab what effects are going to what shakers. You want to set yours up as custom so you can have the max amount of channels available. And with this Startech sound card, you can have up to 8 channels. The way it works essentially is there's 4 outputs available on the sound card, and each one is a stereo output, so you can have 2 shakers on each output. So, for example, channel 1 for me is my brake pedal, and channel 2 is my throttle. Channel 3 is my left seat shaker. Channel 4 is my right seat shaker. Channel 7 is my right rig shaker because I didn't wire it up right. And and channel 8 is my left rake shaker. Actually, yeah. Channel 8's left, channel 7 is right.
Oh, I don't think I'm a lot dumber than you thought that I thought I was once.
That's why some of these things are flipped directionally. Bro, they're actually not, which is why some of this shit's been feeling weird. So, cool, let's go through and change it. When you reinstall your sound card, which I've done in the past, your settings are going to get undone and you're going to have to redo them. The last time I did this, I did it kind of in a rush. And it looks like I ended up flipping some of the channels. This is actually a really important note for people who are building a bass shaker setup or have never done one before. The further the shaker is from your body, the harder it is to tell where the feeling is coming from. And that's why in my setup I have the shakers on the pedals and the shakers inside the seat cushions, because those are much more localized and give me much more specific information, which we can dive into in a second when I go through the settings here. The first thing you're going to want to do is map the settings that you want to use to the correct shakers themselves. You can kind of go through and look at what I have here. iRacing doesn't support everything, but I just mapped it all the way it's supposed to be for me, just to get some clarity. And I'm going to label these now. I could go fix that, but I'm honestly too lazy to do it, so sorry. But yeah, this is my setup essentially, right? The left front and the right front are on my pedals, and those are basically connected directly to my feet, so I can feel them at all times while I'm driving. I drive with a left foot brake, right foot throttle. Some of the effects that I have mapped, for example, are ABS, engine vibration, gear shift. I have lateral G-force, road impacts, road rumble, road vibration, pretty much all the stuff, right? And the reason for that is because some of these are going to be ongoing effects like RPM or engine vibration, and they'll be interrupted by some of the more aggressive effects like ABS active or traction loss, for example, which is the only feedback for the tires really that iRacing will give you directly when it comes to locking up. The wheels lock doesn't actually work from what I understand, and neither does the wheels slip, I think. It's based on like a percentage of throttle or brake, which isn't really useful. On the seat shakers, I have some of the more like body-based effects, in my opinion. A lot of the wheel, like the traction loss stuff, is just for good information as well. When I'm locking up, I want to know, and if I'm breaking the wheel, like the rear tires loose, I also want to know, and so I tend to just have the stuff set up to alert me well. And then for the chassis shakers, the BST-2s, some of the more lower end frequency kind of stuff is all I really want here. So I have the engine vibration, gear shift, jump landing, road impacts, vibration, and rear wheel lock. And this is all going to just be stuff that's the more rumbly kind of feel, big bumps and thumps and stuff like that. And I want that to be separate from the stuff that tells me the attitude of the car, like traction loss, speed with curving, which if you don't understand what speed with curving is, speed with curving just gives you like a gradual vibration on the side of the lateral G's as you're turning. It's more related to the steering wheel angle than anything from what I understand in relation to your speed. But for me, it really simulates sort of like that internal feeling of inertia in a real car. And so I personally like it a lot because it helps me gauge sort of like the G load through maybe a higher speed sustained corner, something like at Silverstone or Suzuka, where you're doing a lot of weight management at high speed. It's something that I prefer. So now let's look at the effects profile tab. Each one of those effects that we just enabled for each shaker is now going to show up here. And this is where you fine tune your settings. So for example, you can see I've got my ABS active set at 41%, which is kind of arbitrary, but around 40%. And the frequency I chose is 44 hertz. I think that's what's standard, but each one of these effects can be dialed in for the vibration frequency you want, the amount of gain you want it to have as well. And you can also tweak some of the details of each one individually. I'm just going to kind of click through and show you some of my settings, give you some frame of reference, but when you get this, the realistic thing you're going to have to do is sit down and spend some time just dialing and trying stuff to see what everything feels like. Because some of the things are going to feel different to you than it does to me based on your setup or choices of shakers or whatever. So understand that this isn't something that's going to be that plug and play, and neither are any of the off-the-shelf kits. You're going to have to do the same tuning process if you're using SimHub either way. So don't think that buying like a butt kicker is going to be that much easier, because like I said before, if you do and you set it up the way they tell you to and don't use SimHub, you're just going to end up having a subwoofer rumbling your rig in coordination with the sound, which is a little bit helpful, but not nearly as good as using SimHub like this. So all of these, you can see I've kind of tweaked the gain to get them all balanced correctly. Some of them I've changed the frequencies intentionally to kind of give me more distinct feel between them, and some of them are the same, like road rumble, road impacts. To me, hitting a pothole or a curb is the same thing, so I don't need that to feel different. Like a thump is a thump, right? But with something like the lateral G-force, I kind of want this to be a more distinctly different feeling. So I understand that this is the lateral G-force buzz, not a bumpy road surface, for example. And so when I go through here and test, when I hit the left G-force button, the front left shaker and the seat left shaker buzz. If I do the right side buzzes. Now if you compare that to something like the road rumble, with the front left, just the front left shakes, the rear left, the rig rumbles at 44 hertz, which is a much lower frequency than 66 for the lateral G-force. Hard to say if you guys can tell, but sort of the point of the localization of all of these things. So traction loss, for example, I have programmed at 60 and 70 hertz. Effects profile settings, right? This is where you do all your tweaking. You got to make sure you use these green switches to turn on the shit that you want. So you can see like decel G-force, XL D-force. I don't have those set up. They're just not on, right? So some of the stuff you saw mapped in the sound output menu is not actually in use. Jump landing, for example. I don't even think this works in iRacing. Missed gear, same thing, turned off. Simulated road texture, speed. My speed with curving is actually turned off right now, so that's interesting. I think I got the G-forces working. Lateral G-force, yeah, that's the one that I got working now. So maybe disregard what I said earlier about speed with curving also, because that was how I was doing it before, and I don't remember how I set it up. Alright, either way, you've seen what I have now, so now I'm going to get us into iRacing, and we're going to take a look at what it looks like, what it feels like driving the car around. So now we're driving, right?
Wow, right? Yeah, great, thanks. Amazing.
I better turn these down. It's gonna be kind of weird, but maybe I'll turn the sound off almost entirely. Alright, so each car is gonna be different, and honestly I didn't test this profile before jumping in. Your shaker profile is gonna adjust between cars, so this one is a little bit insane on the rumblies, but we're just gonna go with it. So as I'm driving around, I can kind of describe to you some of the feelings that I'm feeling. In my pedals right now, I'm feeling a lot of the road texture. As I turn the corner right, I feel heavier rumble on the left side because we're loading up the front left. As I turn the car left, I feel a heavier rumble on the right side because we're loading up the front right. I'm feeling the same feelings in the seat cushions as I sway side to side right now. I can feel a pretty strong vibration in the seat pads. I can hear a pretty decent rumble coming from the rig shakers as well. And the pedals are doing the same thing. As I go over some of these curbs, my seat shakes pretty vigorously. It's a little less aggressive in the front, but I feel it also on top of the textural vibrations or engine vibrations that we were talking about before. So yeah, for me, the shaker, when it comes to the engine vibrations and some of the road texture stuff, is really just more of an immersion thing, although it honestly makes a huge difference to me mentally. I really just feel like I'm in the car a lot more. But more importantly, some of the performance-based benefits for me are in zones exactly like this. And you really have to get hard on the brakes. I can feel the car breaking loose a little bit in the front under heavy braking. As it starts to get to that point of locking up and shimmying, the pedals are letting me know, they're rumbling. I can feel it in the kidney pads as the car starts to sway and get loose a little bit. On the outside left right now, it's rumbling super hard because again, we're loading up the left side of the car. In a straight line, it chills out. It's just kind of a mild vibration, road texture, engine, normal stuff. So again, heavy into a braking zone, I can feel the threshold of the grip under heavy braking in the front. And I know exactly when I'm about to lock up. Something that is like so hard to gauge if you don't have any feedback coming from your pedals, in my opinion. You know, I don't have a ton of experience in IRL driving, but I did some on-track stuff back in the day, and I had a drift car that I would do some events in. So I have like a little bit of knowledge when it comes to spirited driving and sliding the car around, breaking loose, weight transfer, all that stuff. I'm not an expert, but I've felt it before, right? To me, having these shakers is the closest thing I've found so far to really recreating like the grip component and the inertia component of sim racing or of driving in sim racing. And like, I've used full motion setups before. I've never really felt the inertia part, like that kind of almost exaggerated tilting and not swaying, but you know, the exaggerated tilting effect kind of, to me, gives me a lot of what the attitude of the chassis is, like the suspension load, for example. And when you get into heavy braking, right, the chassis pitches forward, and the four corners actuators give you that attitude adjustment of the car, but I feel like that information is not super useful if you can't feel what the tires are doing at the same time. It's like, yeah, the car is pitching forward, but like, obviously, right, I'm stomping on the brakes. Of course it's gonna pitch forward. Whereas with the shakers, feeling the threshold of grip, feeling the tires start to get to that point of locking up, feeling the rumble change as you go through a corner, as you get to that lateral G-force limit, all of that stuff is stuff you feel in a real car, and stuff that even an expensive motion rig can't actually give you. So honestly, I'd argue that even if you intend to one day fully upgrade to a crazy full motion rig, all of these shakers and this entire setup will still be useful, because you can add all of that on top of your full motion rig and get the same sensations I'm talking about and getting right now, but out of that, you know, moving setup. So I'm sure that would just enhance it even more. So honestly, I've been low-key trying to lock up in this car, and it's so hard. I love this thing. The Pro Mazda legacy car in iRacing, one of the most fun cars. They're gonna let you use fucking AIs with it, dude. Make this a series at least week 13. This thing is sick. I'm talking to iRacing directly right now. So back to the shakers, right? So let's say I'm really breaking my shit. One of the cool things, so I don't know if I'm gonna have enough time to really explain it while it's happening, but one of the cool things when you lock up is the vibrations in the brake pedal go from increasing to when I hit the lockup point and go full traction loss, they just drop out entirely. And it's almost like I can feel the moment happen underfoot. And so this car isn't a great example because the brakes are incredible, but in a car with a, you know, lesser grip, you'll have more of that lockup period happening, and you actually have the ability to sort of like modulate within it. So there you can see, right, I don't even have sound turned on barely, so I can't hear the tires almost at all. But I can feel the moment happen in my brake pedal and release as soon as I can feel it drop out, right? You see there's almost like not much time. I mean, I'm not a great driver. I have very little seat time in this car. Let's see, there's another spot I can lock up. So yeah, I mean, this is a great example of why I think, you know, shakers are underrated in my opinion when it comes to performance gains. Everyone thinks it's just about like having fun and, you know, feeling like you're in a race car, and it's like, I get it. It looks a lot like that from the outside, but if you haven't spent much time experimenting with these and seeing the SimHub updates, because they add and change settings with this stuff all the time. So not even everything here has been there the entire time they've supported shakers. Asterisk, I don't know if that's true. But I forgot what I was saying. Shakers, awesome. Shakers are good, right? If you've never used them before, I highly recommend you give them a try. This entire setup costs $250. I don't think we're there in the video, but I'm gonna go for it anyways. Sales pitch, right? This setup cost me, like, I think about $250 all in, a little less than 300 if I'm being honest, and it gives me the layers, like the nuance, you know, the detail that something like a butt kicker just literally can't give you. So yeah, this is sick. Honestly, I think I'm just doing this at this point to just have an excuse to keep driving, because this is really fun for me. And I've never even tried driving with sound off before. This is kind of cool. I'm actually surprised at how easy it is to drive with like no audio feedback, just because I'm so used to it. And yeah, it's because the shakers, dude, they're freaking working. Alright, let's go full send for a couple more corners. We'll go around Oak Tree and then I'll cut it off. We'll send it back to Ian in the office. We'll call him outside Ian. Whoa! Look at that. Oh, it's beautiful. Shakers, bro. Back to you, Ian, in the office. So, final thoughts. If you want to get more out of your sim rig, not just in immersion, but genuine performance as well, a DIY base shaker setup should be your next upgrade. Depending on how you want to build it, you should be able to come in at a lower cost than an off-the-shelf kit and be able to get so much more out of it. I hope this video was helpful for anyone out there looking to build their own base shaker setup. Please let me know in the comments if I missed anything or you want to know more about it. As always, like the video and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. It's been super motivating for me to get so much engagement on my DIY roof video, so I'm really hoping to keep this going and make more sim racing content like this. Let me know what you guys are working on or what you'd like to see me work on next. See you in the next one. Peace. Ah, yeah, sound. Let's go. Oh shit. Oh shit. Oh shit. I was better with no sound. Alright, I'll go back up and finish the video.
Smash Racing doesn't have an intro, 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 doesn't have an intro.